This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Living Economics is brought to you by Respectonomics. My name is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am the voice of Respectonomics. And in Living Economics, we look at some prevailing patterns that are happening in the world of economics and finance, and to some extent in politics. And we welcome your comments. We welcome your ideas. This one is the subject of this particular Living Economics is the subject of interest rates. Now, interest is really effectively rent. It's what it costs to rent money, to rent capital. And if lots of people are looking to rent capital, the price will go up. The interest rates will go up. We're living in a world today, May of 2026, where we are experiencing an upward trend in interest rates. I think one of the things we should also understand about interest rates is there's a certain amount that's not fully understood. There's emotional issues, there's issues of how governments are behaving, corporations are behaving, individuals are behaving, and it is at one level an incredibly complex subject. But we want to talk about interest rates today from the standpoint of two things. One is there's the administered rate, which means where the government sets the rate, and then there's the market rate. And we want to look at both of these. The administered rate, which is where you hear a central bank saying we are raising or lowering interest rates, always sounds like a central bank has control of interest rates. And the answer is, to some extent they do. It's a very technical discussion when you talk about interest rates at the central bank, because it's the rate at which they will pay on overnight deposits from a commercial bank. And I think most of us, our eyes glaze over when we hear that kind of conversation. We think, oh yeah, well, that's high finance at its finest. And I think we can look at this whole issue of interest rates through the eyes of very practical housekeeping. What I mean by that is the rate of interest may be set proverbially by the government, by the central bank, by the finance department, and they all can say, well, this is the rate we're setting. But the truth of the matter is, ultimately, an interest rate is a form of rent, and rent, as we all know, is a product of supply and demand. When there's a lot of product on the market, the price tends to go down. When there's a scarcity of that product, the price usually goes up. So, for example, if there's a lot of rental accommodation, then the price of rent will go down. If the rental space, rental capacity is scarce, then rents will go up. But the point I'm getting at here is this, that I think we should all pay attention to, is the interest rates are effectively set by the market, by people who are wanting to borrow money or people who are wanting to lend money. In today's world, we have an upward movement in interest rates that is happening in the market for one primary reason, and that is that the average borrower today is being crowded out. Now, you may say, what do you mean by crowded out? And that is because there are two crowd spoilers in the middle of our lives. There's the government and there's the corporation. And both of them are aggressively seeking to borrow money to their own ends. The government borrows money because by borrowing the money, that is what enables the government to provide services that it believes people want or that people are demanding. And in order to do that, if it doesn't have sufficient money in the till, in other words, if the revenues are not coming in to match these expenses, the government ends up borrowing money. And if it borrows money, it has to pay for it. It's called interest. And the governments are aggressively borrowing money these days. As a matter of fact, it is very clear that the amount that governments are borrowing is disproportionate to the size of the population, the productivity of the population, the economic wherewithal of the population. The money or the borrowings are growing disproportionately. And as they grow disproportionately, the money that has been supplied has been coming from the central banks. The central bank buys the bonds, the money comes into the system, the money that's then used to fund whatever needs to be funded. The problem is this, that that money that is being created is over and above the output, the traditional output that the economy is creating, so that you've now got more money being pushed into the system. That money is then effectively raises the price of everything. Imagine everybody gets a 10% pay rise. If everybody gets a 10% pay rise, it's pretty straightforward that prices will rise by 10%. The government issues these bonds, it gets the money, spends the money, it drives prices up. So that the borrowing, first of all, is creating this demand on the supply of money. And as the demand rises above the supply, up goes the price. Number one. Number two, the central bank understands that the money that's being pushed into the system is also raising prices. And in order to contain the prices, says or believes that by raising interest rates, it can stem the demand for the money and slow things down. Now, here's the problem. The interest rate that is being artificially pushed up, this is when the central bank sets an interest rate, when the interest rate is being pushed up by the central bank, it may be doing it for what it believes to contain inflation. It's always its usual metric. The truth of the matter is that one of the primary reasons behind the rise of prices today in other corridors outside of money, if you take oil, for example, or fertilizers or semiconductors, a lot of these prices are being driven up because of a scarcity that's associated with stuff not getting to the market. If oil's not getting to the market and I still want to drive my car, the price of, the price of fuel is going to be pushed up, which is exactly what you see. So you see the price of fuel going up, the price of fuel goes up, it affects your cost of living, it affects how farmers work, it affects the trucking industry, it affects the food industry, and the list goes on. It drives up prices. If you think about it, raising interest rates in that particular context is in fact counterintuitive. It's counterproductive because what it does is it in fact enforces or enables prices to rise even more. After all, if you find out as a merchant that your costs are going up because you can't get the product, oil, for example, well, and up goes the price. And then you find out that it's costing you more to be in business because when you borrow money, the price of money has gone up. So you actually tack that on to the end price of your product as well. So your product price is not only the result of the original commodity being in short supply, now it's going up because the money is costing more money. In other words, it becomes self-perpetuating. So raising interest rates at an artificial level is not a good idea. And when it comes out of the free market that's raising the interest rates, which is really, really where interest rates are set in the free market, just like every other price, just like every other rent, when the price in the market is being raised, we need to understand what is it that is actually, what is the problem? Why are these prices rising? And the answer is because governments are borrowing too much money. They're borrowing it for reasons that are often counterintuitive. They're borrowing the money out of a sense of, well, if we borrow the money and spend the money, we will get re-elected. And if you start thinking of the combination of the objectives and the borrowing, you would say there's a misappropriation, there's a misalignment. Here's one truth for most of us. In the last 25 years, government spending has increased, let's just say significantly or disproportionately, use whatever word you want. Then you say to yourself, well, what is the role of government? And the government is to assist in defense, in structure, infrastructure, roads, hospitals, education. You can think of a number of issues that you hold government responsible for doing. Now, here's the question. That money that's been spent in the last 25 years, which we'll just glibly say has tripled, is it fair to say, or to ask, it's fair to ask, but the answer needs to be fair, has the quality of the product the government provides, has it actually tripled either in quality or in quantity? And the answer to both is not. And here's another, excuse me, here's another issue with the issue of borrowing money at the governmental level. Not only does it raise the entire interest rate structure and all the costs associated with that, whether you're a homeowner or a business owner, or whatever it would be, but there's another problem too with government spending. Follow the track. When governments are spending money and governments are borrowing money, the benefit of the immediate benefit of the money that flows into the system often goes to where those people already have significant assets and significant wealth. In other words, it's adding to the divergence, this misappropriation of the difference between them that has it and them that doesn't. We're very aware of this extraordinary divergence in wealth, the concentration that's happening at one end and the poverty, if you will, or the paucity that's happening at the other. And government spending and government borrowing has a nasty habit of benefiting immediately those who are closest to the government's wire, the ones who are closest to them, and they are the ones that can receive the benefit, and they're often the ones that are already empowered with either monopolies or capital or in a position that they can take immediate advantage of these funds. That was never meant to be the intent of the government spending and the government borrowing. Therefore, to state the obvious, I believe the obvious, governments need to control or contain their spending, and they need to be more directional on where that spending is going, and they need to explain to people the reasons for containing the spending and, where necessary, the reasons for increasing the spending. Transparency would be very helpful. Interest rates are rising. The market is the one that's pushing it up and responding. And the answer is that these interest rates will, in a sense, be the vortex in reverse and start adding to the cost of living, which in itself will be inflationary, which will in fact encourage people to think that they need higher interest rates to counter the effect of inflation. Because when we talk about government markets needing higher interest rates, let us also remember that if your capital is going down in value by 5% a year because of inflation, it just isn't buying as much. It only buys 95%. So if you've lost 5% of the value of your capital, by definition, you're going to say, well, I want more money in interest to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. So we've got a lot of nasty conflicts going on in the system that requires mature and ethical standards to bring back spending and borrowing in proportion to the real state of the economy and its true legacy in the future. My name's Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'd be glad to share these thoughts with you on a personal basis, in a corporate setting, in a political setting, in workshops, meetings, wherever you would like. We can arrange that. And in the meantime, I rest my case.